Thank you very much. As it has for much of its history, Poland stands again at a crossroads. The relations between Poland and its neighbors are not good. To the west, the EU is considering sanctioning Poland this week over reforms to its judiciary and other issues. Poland's also had a strained relationship with Germany over the refugee crisis, as has most of Eastern Europe, which has not taken in refugees, as Germany has. But the immediate threat to Poland today, for our discussion, appears to be to the east, to Russia, Poland's neighbor, with which it shares a common border in Kaliningrad, up on the northeast. Recently, Russia conducted a military exercise in Moldova, in which it simulated the repression of a put down of Polish insurgents in Moldova, and one of the exercises involved the explosion of a tactical nuclear device close to Poland's border. So, as we gather here today at the beginning of the Atlantic Forum's conference here in Wroclaw, a city that used to be called Breslau, which itself has seen a lot of changes of ownership over time. We are privileged to bring together a distinguished panel of international experts to talk about security at this point in Europe. If you could, please reserve your applause as I introduce all of our speakers. First of all, we have the Minister of Defense from the Republic of Georgia, that is Ms. Tina Kidasheli. Georgia waged a brief war with Russia in 2008 over the breakaway provinces of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The conflict was regarded as the first European war in the 21st century. She's a lawyer, a human rights expert, and a native of Tbilisi. Her husband is the chairman of the Georgian parliament. The U.S. and the West's refusal to admit Georgia to NATO, she says, is an open invitation to more Russian aggression. Sitting next to her is the Foreign Affairs Minister from Lithuania, Mr. Linkaitis. I'm sorry. You studied electronics at University in Kaunas. You became a newspaper correspondent briefly after your country obtained its independence in 1990. You have served as the defense minister of Lithuania, as its ambassador to NATO, and to neighboring Belarus. You've been foreign affairs minister since 2012. You are a constant opponent of compromise with Russia, and you have said that Russia no longer poses a serious alternative to Western liberal democracy. I believe he's here, I hope he is, and that would be Mr. Krzysztof Czerski, the State Secretary and the Chancellery of the Polish President, Andrzej Duda. He's a native of Krakow. He studied international relations. He's a longtime government advisor to the Polish government on issues of European integration. He's currently the Parliament's representative to the Council of Europe. Earlier this year, he said NATO should be present on Europe's eastern flank to counter Russian aggression. Poland has asked NATO to put thousands of troops and ammunition in Poland on a permanent basis or a rotating basis, which could pose problems for a 1997 agreement with Russia over the positioning of Western troops in Eastern Europe. Damon Wilson is the Executive Vice President for Programs and Strategy of the Atlantic Council. He's the Council's specialist on Europe's East, the West Balkans, and the Black Sea region. He previously worked for the U.S. National Security Council as a special advisor to the Council's president and director, and was a former chief of staff and executive secretary at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. He has coordinated U.S. government efforts on Eastern Europe and the Balkans with the EU and NATO. Paula Dobriansky is an expert on Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union who has served in 5 U.S. presidential administrations, both Democrat and Republican. She's currently a senior fellow at JFK Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard. Her father, the late Lev Dobriansky, was a Ukrainian-American economist and a prominent anti-communist activist during the Eisenhower administration. She grew up in Virginia. I am Kevin O'Brien. I'm editor-in-chief of Handelsblatt's Global Edition, the English language edition of Germany's leading financial newspaper, Handelsblatt. I'm a former Bloomberg bureau chief, and I wrote about technology and digital issues for the New York Times and the IHT for about a decade. I'm a native of New York. I've lived in Germany and Austria for 22 years. My wife's from Berlin. Our son, who is 8, can ignore us in 2 languages, I like to say. And that is our distinguished panel. And if you would, please give them a round of applause as we invite them up onto the stage. No, you can't. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Okay. If we can, let's start with Minister Kidasheli from Georgia. Our topic today is keeping Europe safe. Your country fought a brief border conflict with Russia 8 years ago. Is Europe's safety in jeopardy today?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here, and thank you to Atlantic Council for being everywhere and organizing this wonderful event. We just hosted together jointly the 10th Annual Security and Defense Conference in Tbilisi as well, and thank you for that also. Well, I think Europe is in danger today, as well as the global security. I think that after Crimea, there was a serious security challenge to the entire world, not just to Europe. I think that there is a country out there that is setting up new international law, that is creating new international order, that is in the process of revising everything that civilized world had agreed about after the Second World War. And I think that there is a need for a very serious response to it. What we are seeing today is the world that basically follows the actions of Kremlin. We are all in a kind of a reactive mode. We follow, we react as they act. And it is troubling. I think the Warsaw Summit in July constitutes a great opportunity for everybody to prove that NATO is united, and that's extremely important to show to everybody and to make sure that nobody has an idea that there is a separate game Russia has with different countries. So the unity of NATO will be #1 issue as we see it for the Warsaw Summit. Number 2 is to show that there is a positive agenda, that there is a plan, there is a roadmap that clearly shows the even bigger deterrence power on the side of countries neighboring Russia. That clearly shows that NATO does everything possible for peace and for preventing any further confrontation. And number 3, I think that this is the time for courageous decision-making. I would see Warsaw Summit as an opportunity for NATO to prove to Russia that it is in charge of its own decision-making and that Russia does not have a veto power on any decisions coming out of Brussels or Warsaw, in this case, being the host of the summit. And to see that, and to show that Europe, being one, free, and safe, is not limited to Article 5 boundaries. And that world today is not involved with putting up a new Berlin Wall or putting up a new Iron Curtain at this time on Article 5 boundaries. And everybody else is left for Russia as its backyard to deal with the issues and to sort out the problems there themselves.
So,
this is how I would see things developing from now to July.
So if I could then, Mr. Likavicius.
Better try, yeah. Much better.
Eventually I will get there. That sounds like Europe's safety is in jeopardy, if I can summarize that. Lithuania has a border also with Russia at Kaliningrad. Could you describe what is the situation at the Lithuanian border right now with Russia? Is it tense, any more tense than usual, or is it calm? How would you describe that?
Well, first of all, very good to be in Wroclaw, and thank you for inviting me, of course. And this is endless talk about these dangers, and frankly speaking, if you talk about the situation on the border, yes, it's calm, how it should be otherwise. But the tension is psychologically, and first of all, I'd like to talk not about capabilities, but first of all about mindset. Because psychologically we also should be more consolidated, and frankly speaking we have to assess risks also adequately to the situation. What's not the case by far. And I have in mind very dangerous developments when we're talking about the confrontation, conflicts. Everything now, connecting dots, everything has to do with Ukraine today, frankly speaking. And because not only Georgia as well, all Eastern Partnership countries, but war is going in Ukraine. Let me remind that that's the only capital where people were dying with the European Union flags in their hands. They were fighting for the freedom of their country, also for the values which are important to all of us. Are we doing enough to support them? My answer would be no, not enough. And that's, again, it's not about Ukraine, it's about us, about our perception, about our ability to react adequately in time, to do what we have to do, in order not to be surprised when another conflict will erupt somewhere else. And by the way, it's not the first time we are not learning lessons. And we can recall some history, and maybe not going too far backwards, just let me recall 2008 Georgia. War in Georgia, where part of country was occupied. We were reacting, but it was really not enough because we got back to business as usual very quickly. And again, we're surprised when some conflicts were started in other places. Why I'm saying this? Because now again I hear voices that let's be serious, let's be pragmatic, let's get back to normal dialogue. Leaders, sorry for saying this, maybe it's too bluntly, but leaders are queuing to go to Moscow to meet, which is also very good. I understand the channels of communication is very important. But if they really bring some added value, but if contacts, especially on this visible high level, serving as a smoke screen for somebody to continue with the policy which is really not very rational, so to say, this is really problematic. So since it's, I understand, it's just introduction, so
yeah,
you would
sure.
not like to listen to me half an hour. So just my point is that let's talk about
don't.
mindset.
The question I have, though, if I could follow, you say the situation on your border is calm, and then you talk about
nobody fighting on the border. That's my point.
Yeah, but I'm sorry.
Nobody's shooting or fighting on our border because we are secure. We are members of NATO and European Union.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that situation is calm.
Okay. All right. Well, Let me move it then. As you said, it was an introductory remark, so if we could, let's move it to our Polish colleague, the host today, Mr. Czerski. We're in your country today in a city that's changed hands many times over history. Poland is asking NATO to base thousands of troops and heavy equipment here on a permanent or rotating basis, which would probably be viewed by Russia as a provocation. Do you really expect NATO to risk open conflict with Russia over Poland?
Okay, should I start by, it's not just a ritual, thanking the organizers for having me here, and I really like to also underline the best greetings from the President Andrzej Duda. I'm just coming straight from meeting with Madam Mogherini. President has a conversation with Madam Mogherini today, and really working hard on the success of the NATO summit in Warsaw. If I may, before answering your question, if I just may make a brief comment to your introductory remarks, because please, I just don't want any kind of cliches to not to be confronted in a proper way. And you've just said, gentlemen, that Polish-German relations are deteriorating now. I don't agree with that. And we're just approaching the 25th anniversary of the Polish-German Neighborhood Treaty, and you will see the intensity of the contacts between Poland and Germany in the coming weeks, starting from the 16th of June till the 22nd, when you got the bilateral visits of the Polish president to Germany, German president to Poland, the bilateral intergovernmental conference of Polish and German government, that I'm really don't want this to be not somehow answered, this kind of general assessment that I just think it's inappropriate. And the second, you just said, gentlemen, that EU is waiving the sanctions over Poland. This is not the case. We are not in any kind of the sanctions procedure over Poland. So please do not repeat this kind of information, because they are just untruth. And then to your question. What we believe is the goal of a NATO summit in Warsaw is to show that the NATO can adapt in a long-term adaptation to the new geopolitical situation of our region. That it is the NATO that can set the rules of the strategic environment in our region. That we are not answering to the developments, but we are setting the rules by ourselves, and that we are able, as an alliance, to come back to our own roots. That is collective security of the territory of the NATO member states, and then to be able to expose this security to our to the closest neighborhood, and then to keep the open door policy of the NATO, so we can really also one day include the countries like Georgia into the alliance itself. So this is the goal. So it's not about to provoke anybody. It's just to reassure our own societies, our own peoples, and the alliance as such, that we are able to creatively come back to the roots of the NATO, which is the collective defense and security, and that we can guarantee the security in a long-term adaptation to the new challenges. And we know that the Wales summit was a good answer, in an immediate good answer, I would say. Still decided in the Wales, in the Newport in Wales, that this decision that were made there was still I would say, in the light of the hope that this geopolitical change is temporary. Now we know that this geopolitical change will stay with us, and that we have to answer in the long-term perspective. And that's what we see, the presence of the NATO troops, infrastructure, and intelligence and surveillance capacities that it will actually be the first, I would say, step into this long-term adaptation of NATO to its current geopolitical environment.
Okay.
So it's not the provocation just the other way, it's just a proper answer.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And thanks for clarifying that. Open to all opinions. And Mr. Wilson, you've advised the U.S. National Security Council on this region repeatedly over the years. Is this part of Europe any more or less stable than it's ever been?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back in Wroclaw. And let me just add to the contributions of my colleagues already to say, I think the difference, as the State Secretary just pointed out, there is a fundamental change that's taken place in European security. The Wales NATO summit began, as Christoph said, hoping and thinking that maybe there was a temporary shift in Russia's posture. I think it has settled into alliance leaders that we are in this for a long haul, that there has been a fundamental change to Europe's security architecture today. And so, yes, it's a different narrative, it's a different story, it's a different environment. And the alliance began at Wales to make a contribution to respond to that. We see that the Warsaw Summit will help shift the alliance from simply talking about reassurance to the allies to putting the alliance on a more deterrence posture, if you will. But this, I think, is still just the beginning. I think what we're having to see, in part because of Russia's actions driving this, is return to the basics in the alliance structure of how to think about defense and security on the European continent because of an adversary here to Poland's east. And it's that fundamental change which has required really going back to basics within the alliance in terms of the muscle movements, in terms of the force structure, taking a look at some of the assumptions that were really faulty. The current NATO strategy had been based on the proposition that Russia was a strategic partner, Europe was at peace, and that's not the situation today. So I think we're just beginning to see the reaction to this process, and we have to accept the fact that the stability of Europe is in question today, first and foremost by a revanchist Russia. That is the direct threat and the direct challenge for the alliance. But we also have to recognize that the instability that we've seen in the Middle East and the refugee and migrant flows that have swept across the Mediterranean have proved to be a destabilizing factor on Europe itself in terms of solidarity that holds Europe together. And so these are the two issues that exacerbate the external threats from the East and the South, come at a time of, I think, strategic peril because of some of the challenges we have internally. A weakened Europe, forces of fragmentation pulling Europe apart, an uncertainty looming over American leadership, and particularly American leadership in Europe. And so those factors combined together mean that this really is an important moment, a challenging moment, and a moment of the greatest threat and insecurity in Europe that we've seen since the end of World War II.
Thank you for that. Ms. Dobriansky, you've served in 5 U.S. presidential administrations. You've seen the Cold War, you've seen the thaw, you've seen various temperatures. What appetite do you think the U.S. government has at this point to get involved again in a real way in the defense of Eastern Europe?
Well, let me first, if I may, thank the mayor of Wrocław and the city of Wrocław for hosting us, as well as the Atlantic Council and the Polish Center for International Affairs. And this is a most timely topic. Before I answer that question, I would like to just address that issue of the challenge, because that matters for the answer that or the question that you have posed as to what the American appetite is. I'd say first that I think that it's crucial to look at where is Europe headed. The question that's before us is, I think we are witnessing one of the greatest challenges that we haven't really seen heretofore, and that is the challenge not only in the direct security context, but the political underpinnings of the security framework that has preserved peace, stability, and security in and throughout Europe and the transatlantic relationship since post-World War II, as well as the Cold War. And that fact, the challenge of our values as posed by Moscow, the challenge of the alliance, as well as the very institutions that have formed and framed this peace and stability are in question. So the question you asked is, well, what's the appetite? I will say that first and foremost, and we see it very directly stated, in fact, by both political parties, Republican and Democrats, that there has to be burden sharing. That the day of where the United States comprises the lion's share of contributing to security issues, that has since gone. And I know we've known, it's been out there for a while, that it's absolutely essential and critical for countries in Europe to step forward and to put resources behind the kind of security challenges before us. A number of countries have stepped forward and have done that, some have not. Secondly, though, having said that, I don't see us as being divorced from the situation. I do think that the United States has always had a real stake in the direction of Europe. Part of that is derived from the kind of ties that we have, ties in terms of our ethnic communities, ties in terms of our business and trade relationships, no less the fact that the military infrastructure and alliance also brings us together. We've had a common goal and a common mission. What I would say is one of the challenges faced is not just the issue that you address, which is what direction the U.S. public will go in, which is this burden sharing, but I see a complacency in Europe. And that's something that I'm very concerned about, that there's a complacency that things will get better, and I don't see it going in that direction.
Thanks for that. Ms. Kitasheli, what is the mood in Tbilisi 8 years after your border war with Russia? Do people go about their daily lives thinking another invasion is possible? Is that something so ever-present, or is this part of history? And what do most Georgians think about what Russia is trying to pursue in your region and more broadly in Eastern Europe?
Well, first of all, the war in Georgia did not start in 2008. And that's the legacy we all remember. Unfortunately, the rest of the world heard about the Georgia-Russia war in 2008 because there were lots of BBC and CNN cameras there, and you could have watched it live, basically. But this war has started right after the independence of Georgia. Already in 1991, we had the first Georgia-Russia war in South Ossetia, and since then it never stopped. And then there was a war in Abkhazia, and then again South Ossetia and Abkhazia again, and it was over and over again. So whether Georgians believe that it's part of history already, no. As long as the occupation is there, as long as the aggression continues, as long as we are facing the creeping annexation basically on a daily basis in my country, and because the war has been on and off for the last 25 years, the feeling that it's part of the history and everything is done and over is not there. At the same time, I believe that every Georgian believes that there is no solution to the problems that we have in war and in confrontation. And everything that is done by the Georgian government is based on confidence building, is based on returning the loyalty of the people living on the other side of the boundary lines rather than confrontation, rather than believing that we will have another adventure, being it in South Ossetia or Abkhazia. But at the same time, though, this mood is not shaped by only and exclusively of the Georgian policies, or what is it the Georgian politicians will do in Tbilisi, or what is it, what will be the decisions we will take in Tbilisi. Obviously, everybody understands. Linas was saying here that the Ukraine is the only country where people were dying with European Union flags in their hands, and I would doubt that, because I believe, we strongly believe that we've been dying with European Union and NATO flags in Georgia as well. All these 25 years of history of war and bloodshed in Georgia was exactly because of the choice our people have made a long time ago, but especially, obviously, together with the independence. Going to NATO, going back to the European family, where we believe that Georgia belongs to, was the reason for all the troubles we went through. And yes, people in Tbilisi and in the rest of Georgia believe that there is a solution only if that solution is based on the consensus between Georgia and its partners. If there will be a way found by all of us together, if this way is found within the European Union. There is even a famous, very famous slogan now in Georgia that when talking about territorial integrity or return of South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia, a state, we say, let's go together to Europe and let's enjoy Europe together. That's kind of a notion that we are trying to have as popular as possible in Georgia. But obviously there is a certain feeling of abandonment at the same time, and I cannot deny that, regardless of how enthusiastic I am about decisions coming about Georgia from both sides of Brussels, being it European Union or NATO. Obviously, this skepticism is growing. Obviously, undeliverable Europe is becoming more and more of a common notion for many Georgians than it was, let's say, 8 years ago, or when the war started. There is a feeling that we are stuck somewhere there, okay, and the decisions are delayed. But anyways, regardless of those feelings, I would say easily that every Georgian believes that that's the only way we go, and there is enough patience in a country left to wait until that moment will come and we will finally get to the family where we believe that we belong to.
Thank you for that. Somebody's pinging. But Mr. Linkovicius, is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. If you could, a factual question, if I could start with. What percentage of Lithuanians have Russian ancestry in terms of, and is that...
What percentage of what?
Lithuanian residents were born and grew up in Lithuania, and what percent came to Lithuania from other parts of Russia? Now, I know that's an issue more in Latvia and Estonia, but no. I wanted to ask you about the kind of ethnic population makeup.
I got it, yeah. I'll answer. It's not the issue in Lithuania. Frankly speaking, we we have 6% of Russians, 6% of Poles, something like that. Some majority is Lithuanians. It was always like that, and all these minorities are well integrated into the, I shouldn't say assimilated, they're integrated into the country, so it's really not problematic. But may I behave a bit more freely, and I would like to react to what you said or asked Krzysztof Szczerski about provocations.
Please.
Because it has to do with our subject. It has to do with the behavior, with the contacts with Russia, how we are dealing, how we are treating each other. And provocation, yes, Russia acts, actions of Russia provocative. Aggressive, also actions are divisive, so to say. They're dividing us, splitting us. That's also true. What we are doing in return. We are defensive. Our narrative also is defensive. We are reacting to what's happening, not telling our own story. We also are provocative, that's my point. Because provocation in terms that non-action is provocation. Because I disagree with those who say that if we'll say something, it's provocative, if we'll do something, it's provocative, but if we'll not do when we have to do, this is provocative. And this is also important to tell now, because what kind of provocation could be if we're treating our defense seriously? If we're doing minimum I'd like to stress something to guarantee our security. If we're deploying battalion size of light units in each of our Baltic states' territory, is it dramatic or not? What is dramatic in my view, when we are shying away from our responsibility, and even refraining, by the way, I shouldn't criticize our own, so to say, collective thinking, but look, you know that we are not using terminology permanent presence of troops, because it looks too provocative for some colleagues, right?
Yeah,
We're talking about permanent rotation or whatever. Why?
it's
I don't know.
semantics, right? Isn't
It's
it?
no. It's just our mindset. Coming back to the partners, we cannot put in the official documents wording with regard to the European perspective to them. Again, somebody think it's too provocative. Although it's just direction to the Europe, it's what could be otherwise if they are implementing this DCFTA association agreement with European Union. So it's with Europe, it's cooperation with Europe. So direction is European. But we cannot tell this because it looks maybe too provocative. So I'm coming to the point that we are too weak because we are really, oh, by the way, one more point. It has to do with the presence of troops. And I see Sandy Virgil, Deputy Secretary General here of NATO, and he knows very well what I'm talking about. It has to do with the obligations, unilateral, I would say, obligations of NATO to Russia, because we have some founding act, all other documents. And it was said some time ago that NATO will refrain from deploying substantial deployments in territories of new member states. But some colleagues saying that there should be no deployments at all because we promised to Russia. Substantial means substantial. Substantial, definitely, it's not 4 jets in our airspace conducting air policing. Substantial, definitely, it's not battalion or even 5 battalions. It's not substantial. But we are advocating Russians more than they are doing themselves. That's my point. So this is, again, has to do with your question to Krzysztof Siersky, because you asked him whether it's provocative or not to do what we have to do, frankly speaking. It was, it was one more point, by the way. We had for 10 years even more, we had no Article 5 exercises in NATO because it was too provocative to do what we have to do. Now, not the case anymore. We are training our troops, we are preparing for the summit in Warsaw, and I have no doubt it will be success. But I'm talking about the tendencies, trends, which are still in our mindset, and this is the main obstacle to be free.
Thank you for that. That's an interesting point, Mr. Chesky. Coming back to you, you've just heard statements. There is a fundamental promise with being in NATO that NATO will be there when you need them. Do you believe that the Polish people right now are eyeing that promise carefully to see what NATO does and whether they deliver or not? Is the credibility of NATO up for debate in Poland at the moment?
Yes, you're right. I think what is very important also to know when you assess the foreign policy of today is that the foreign policy is no longer done in closed rooms. It is also being judged, assessed, and viewed by societies, and it should be also, so to say, publicly proven, and it should be. There is something that Dominic Moisy once defined as the geopolitics of emotions, and you have to also take into consideration this thing that really, if you deliver something, it should be also viewed by your own society as something that you are delivering the message and delivering the expectations that was raised. And I believe that the Warsaw Summit in a way that, of course, it is done in the alliance compromise, in a sense that we, from the very beginning of this preparation to the Warsaw Summit, we said that the unity of the alliance is a value itself. So we have to keep the unity of alliance, because this is also the message. The message comes from unity. So of course, when we discuss the real what would be decided in Warsaw, as Damon said, it's just the first step. But as we see it now, there is a big hope that we actually in Warsaw will make a kind of Copernicus shift in a way we see the eastern flank defense and deterrence on the eastern flank. That means we went from the philosophy of reassurance to the practice of presence, and this is the biggest change. This is actually the thing that we wanted to have from the very beginning. As I remember, President Duda meeting Jens Stoltenberg for the first time when he was still the president-elect. That was actually the main message. If Warsaw is supposed to be success in the case of Eastern Flank, we have to move from the philosophy of reassurance to the philosophy of presence, reassurance plus presence, or presence that will allow the reassurance. And this is exactly what we were going to have with this forward presence. This is the presence that will make the reassurance more credible. And this is the shift we wanted to achieve in Warsaw. And I think in this context, yes, we can say to our own citizens, if the Warsaw would actually deliver what is supposed to deliver, that yes, we get the success and you can feel yourself more secure after the Warsaw. And that's on the Eastern Flank. And that's the major thing.
If I can ask, what if the Warsaw Summit does not deliver what most Polish people hope, or maybe that's an overstatement, but what if the Warsaw Summit does not deliver a credible increase in, military presence in Poland? What would the Polish electorate think about that kind of a development?
No,
in relation to NATO.
It is tempting to answer the question, what if? But it's now we just work hard enough not to discuss this kind of scenarios. So let me say that yes, of course, we still are in the process of preparing these final decisions. We do hope, as a host nation, that the crucial final substantive decisions would be made during the Ministry of Defense meeting in mid of June, that it won't prolong up to the last moment before the summit, so that we would know the framework of the decision that's going to be made in Warsaw early enough or in advance enough to also to not to make them under the time pressure. Okay. And this is a very important. I know the Senator Ferber surely would. I don't know, but I hope that he will bow his hand that this would be the perfect scenario if we would make the framework of the decision already in the mid-June, so we can get easy to the summit. And if I just may one brief comment to what our minister has said. Yes, as we see it in Poland. There are the two negative scenarios that we would like to avoid. One is what we know from our own history and we know from the history of Europe is the appeasement history. We don't want any kind of appeasement policy to happen again in Europe, in the transatlantic community. That includes Georgia, that includes Ukraine, that includes all the countries that are that there can be the temptation of appeasement policy towards them. And the second, of course, we want also to avoid the scenario of the Cold War. The Cold War is not the positive scenario. Cold War is a negative scenario for Europe. It's a negative scenario for the NATO-Russia or the NATO neighborhood relations.
That's a fine line to walk, right? Between appeasement and provoking another Cold War, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but still, so we should build the scenario that we will avoid these two possibilities, and that means deterrence, defense, and dialogue. Okay. And it is possible, but in this sequence: defense, deterrence, and dialogue.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Wilson. A lot of talk originating with the Crimea, the situation in eastern Ukraine. You're an expert on this region. From a U.S. perspective, is the Crimea lost to Russia? I interviewed the Russian ambassador to Germany last week, Vladimir Grinin. He said it's an integral part of the Russian Federation and we won't discuss it anymore. Has the conflict in the eastern Ukraine been contained?
So this is what's happening in Ukraine is ground zero, I think, for the future of Europe and, frankly, for the future of what's at stake, a liberal international order that we helped build. So we can't accept, and we won't accept, the fact that Crimea is lost to Russia, or that we're satisfied with the status quo playing out in eastern Ukraine as it is today. If you go back to what our strategy is, the alliance is an alliance, a defensive alliance, an alliance committed to peace. And if you want to consider what's happened here, what's provocative is what Russia, the annexation of Crimea. What's provocative is the military invasion of eastern Ukraine. What's provocative is what Russia's done in Georgia, exercising simulations of attacks on Poland, exercising simulations of the use of nuclear weapons, flybys of NATO warships or aircraft. This is a dangerous, provocative set of actions that are coming from Russia, which unfortunately is positioning itself as our adversary. And frankly, we've been slow and reluctant to move into that position because we didn't want to accept that. And so I just want to underscore this point, whether it's with Ukraine, whether it's with, as we head to Warsaw, that the alliance has a responsibility to preserve peace in Europe, that it's got to flex some muscle. It would be provocative to do nothing and to leave open space and to leave a sense of vulnerability, because Russia's strategy has been to look for those vulnerabilities and exploit them and play that to their advantage. And so the alliance has to be in a position of making it absolutely clear of its deterrence, its commitment, its resolve. But it also means, and I think this is what you're hitting at, the connection between the Warsaw Summit and as we look east to Ukraine and Georgia. The one issue where I'm not satisfied with yet is that we can't say we've got a situation contained in Georgia or Ukraine, for example. The alliance can't be safe. Allies can't be safe just by protecting their own without clarity of a strategy of how to project stability into our most important partners to our east and, frankly, to that matter, to the south. And this is, I would argue, still a little bit of the missing piece of the equation, where the alliance is doing quite well in bolstering its defenses and moving the alliance into a posture of deterrence to make clear the credibility of the Article 5 commitment that we will come to the defense of any ally. But where I think there remains ambiguity, and the ambiguity is a problem that Vladimir Putin is exploiting, is where does the future lie for the countries to NATO's east? And it is, we see a Russian strategy playing out that first and foremost was a strategy to consolidate power at home, to be frank, as we see Mr. Putin using this as a means to consolidate his own control of the Russian people, first and foremost. But second, to pursue a sphere of influence in the post-Soviet space, which means a pushing out of Western engagement, Western influence, and that's what's really the ground zero of playing out in Ukraine and Georgia today, as well as the next issue of trying to create more of a buffer zone and second-tier allies in Central and Eastern Europe. And this is where we can't fall into a posture of accepting the inevitable outcome of what we see in Crimea, or thinking that a situation in Ukraine's east is okay as long as there are not too many people dying. That is corrosive to the world that we built. It's corrosive to the principles that maintain the bedrock of international stability. And if we look at European security today, Crimea, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Transnistria, Russia's strategy of getting a long-term insurance policy to keep the West out of these countries by occupying territory, by fueling these divisions. But it also sets a very bad principle and precedent in terms of its respect for the commitments that it made for European security. On top of that, we see its violation of the INF Treaty, the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty. We see an erosion of both the formal treaties as well as the informal principles that provided stability here. And I think this is going to play out ground zero on whether we actually can push back and help support the aspirations of the Ukrainian people, or whether we fall into the trap of an appeasement strategy over time.
Thank you. Mr. Tobiansky, you have Ukrainian ancestry. I was interviewing George Soros a year ago, and he said the future of Europe is being defended in the Ukraine by Ukrainians, the future of the European Union, even though they're not a member. Can you sketch out a scenario that would plausibly return Crimea to the Ukraine at this point? Is that possible? realistically?
In my view, the answer is yes. The United States pursued a policy of non-recognition vis-à-vis the Baltic states. It took decades, but the Baltic states were returned to their independence. I strongly believe that a firm, consistent, and sustained policy of non-recognition vis-à-vis the illegal annexation of Crimea would lead to its reintegration into Ukraine as part of an independent Ukraine. So steadfastness, consistency matter. Let me add a couple of other points. The Lithuanian minister mentioned himself how crucial Ukraine is to the topic of Europe's security at large. I think he's absolutely right. First, because you have 1.5 to 2 million internally displaced persons in Ukraine, an issue that gets overshadowed because Europe is grappling with refugees coming up from the Middle East, but it's a destabilizing factor in Ukraine. Secondly, the fact that you also had not only the illegal annexation of Crimea, but the aggression. There hasn't been a ceasefire, the aggression in eastern Ukraine, continued deaths, but significantly the undermining and abrogation of the Budapest Memorandum. And in this century, why is it that here there was no adherence to a protocol where Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in return for its territorial integrity and sovereignty? To me, what was striking about that, it affects not only Europe, but by the way, there were many countries in Asia that questioned whether or not there's extended deterrence. So here we are, we're focused in this panel on Europe. Let me just broaden the scope to the globe at large. Many are watching how it gets handled and what NATO will do. And then let me just add, the Georgian minister mentioned, I think very rightly, that the upcoming summit in Warsaw, the NATO summit in Warsaw, is crucial in terms of its impact and its creativity. I think it's crucial that it does make an impact. Ukraine has requested itself, not only the neighborhood, but it has requested military assistance. Your question before to me was about the American public. Interestingly enough, both Republicans and Democrats in Congress supported military aid to Ukraine. Some of that has been given, but not fully what the Ukrainians and crucially asked for. It does matter militarily, economically. The former Minister of Finance, Natalie Jaresko, is sitting right here. She worked very hard and very successfully in Ukraine in getting a debt rescheduling to get Ukraine on its feet and to move forward with reforms. It has quite a handful that it has to deal with. So yes, I have to say that it's not only Crimea. You asked the question about Crimea. I wanted to broaden your question because really the future of Ukraine does have a direct impact on Europe at large. What happens at the Warsaw Summit and defense and our security going forward matters. The economic questions also matter to security. And not only that, but also crucially, as I mentioned earlier, the political underpinning of all of this, the basic desire for Ukraine to make its own choices. People died in the Maidan, and they died because, A, they wanted to have an association with the EU, and also they wanted to see change and a lack of corruption in Ukraine itself. And that next generation is very committed to those kinds of changes. So I do not see the Russian revanchism as succeeding here. And I will say unity of purpose for Europe at large matters in defeating that revanchism.
Well, it's well summarized. I think we're coming to the close of our panel here, so I wanted to throw it to the audience. I know you've been just itching to stand up and yell out, and I see one hand there in the middle of the audience. If somebody could get a microphone over to the gentleman, and there's another one there, and if anybody else has one, okay. And right behind you there, Fran, and I think that should do us. Sir, you just pass that down to him.
Thank you very much. Zbigniew Pisarski, I'm chairman of Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation, Polish think tank specializing in foreign policy and security. I have one short and simple question, I hope simple. What is a bigger threat for European security, UK out or Russia in?
That's an interesting one. Anybody want to jump on that? UK out or Russia in?
Well, I think it's really important to note that I think the celebration that would take place if there is a vote for Brexit will be in the Kremlin. I think it's very connected. The vote in the UK, this referendum, could become a domino effect that really strengthens the forces of fragmentation pulling Europe apart. It could have knock-on effects from Catalonia to Wallonia to Lombard, not to mention sort of the populist and anti-European Union forces that are being fueled across the continent right now. That is Vladimir Putin's strategy. The biggest check on Russia's mischief-making today in Europe is a strong NATO and a unified Europe. If we want to get Russia right, we need Europe to remain united and strong and restore a sense of power and purpose to our alliance. So they're very connected in my view.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you. A quick add-on. When Crimea was illegally annexed, Putin gave a speech in the Duma, and in which he stated on March 18 that the rationale was that Russia no longer identifies with the values of the West, and he stated it quite clearly, and the institutions. I just wanted to support strongly what my colleague Damon Wilson just said. It is one in the same here. That is part of the challenge of undermining the liberal international order, the values, the alliances, and the institutions. And of course, the EU is very much part of that.
I can only tell you, living in Berlin and watching many Russian consumers come and buy expensive German vehicles, that they do identify with the values of the West, despite the public statements. Do we have another question? Yes, sir. If you want, just... yeah, there you go.
Okay. My name is Andrius Kubilius. I'm a former Prime Minister of Lithuania. And, well, my question would ask your imagination. When we're talking about threats, usually we're talking about very near future, like what will happen with Warsaw Summit and so on and so on. But knowing a little bit of Russia, we need to imagine that Mr. Putin can stay in power for the next 20 years without no problems with constitutional limits. So my question is very simple. So what will happen if Mr. Putin is staying in power for the next 20 years? How we can imagine how Russia will look like, what threats we shall face, and what kind of instruments we need to use in order to avoid those threats?
That's a good question. Actuarially, he faces a long lifetime. Don't we have to deal with him in some way? Regardless of all the statements and the well-founded arguments and stuff, he's not going away. Isn't it better to talk to him?
You said deal?
Oh, sorry? Go for
You
it.
said deal?
So what?
You said deal with them?
Deal?
What did you say? Deal? You just say what kind of deal?
Oh, that you have to deal with him, that you have to negotiate.
Well, may I just briefly come in and also partially...
Yeah, but what's your answer? What do you think?
No, okay, I'll answer to the question.
Yeah.
So it's also partially has to do with what was said before, when Russia, it's in Europe geographically, part of Russia at least. So it's already here. The question is about our relationship, and Russia is not a partner today. Russia is a factor, wants to be involved everywhere, wants to take part in the organizations where they have no say or no veto, for instance, wants to reconstruct security architecture of Europe because no veto right. But we have to be very consistent here. We have to talk, but based on values and principles. And frankly speaking, our dialogue should be guided, and this is the answer for long-lasting also career of Mr. Putin, because it will be really stubborn, not aggressive, but consistent. That's my point. It will respect values and international law, not rules invented by Russia for international relations. Because sometimes they're looking for exceptions or special treatment, caveats, whatever, and this is not international law, frankly speaking. So it will stand clear on this, so that will be no deal, but will be a relationship which could be meaningful.
Hold the line, stay unified, wait them out. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ambassador Mushira Khattab, former minister from Egypt. I thank the panelists. So far, what I heard is that the threat to European security is Putin. What about the cracks that are appearing in the European societies because of radicalization and terrorism? Don't you think that this is a greater risk to the security and safety of Europe? Thank you.
That's a good question. You know, we're Russia-focused here. Europe roiled by crises of internal and regional nature. Aren't we focusing on a theoretical problem when there's real problems right under our noses? What do you think of that? Anybody?
Well, I wanted to make a comment on the last one. Maybe I'll let you.
Just if we could take the lady's question. So,
Why don't you go?
You go ahead, Miss.
Right.
Go ahead.
You, of course, you're right. If we look at and then if you look also at the agenda of the Warsaw Summit, it's not going to be the on Russia summit. It's going to be the summit on all the challenges that are coming from the different directions, also from inside. As we had a hybrid and challenges that come into our security, and of course it is. But the problem is that if we would like to challenge this, all these threats separately, we would never succeed in none of these directions one by one. We have to see it somehow as interlinked, because we know that the terrorism, for instance, the best environment to flourish for the terrorism is where the geopolitical cracks are, because then you got all the powers that are playing their own chess games of geopolitics in the territories, which then gets into the vacuum of law and order, and then you have the biggest placement where the terrorism is flourishing. So this is all interconnected. And this is why the agenda of the NATO summit in Warsaw is a full. It have different sessions, including also the projection of the security and stability. Because of course, then I agree it's a real thing.
Okay, great.
May I just make a 30-second to the previous question?
Sure,
Because
if you'd like. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I on the question about Putin, I don't agree with the assumption that of the inevitability, and for two fundamental reasons. One, the foreign policy is rooted in domestic politics. We know that the economy is in shambles. It's in dire straits. Russia's former finance minister, Kudrin, issued a statement recently talking about the dire need for modernization, that it cannot go on this way. But the second answer is that the costs have to be high. Sanctions are being renewed. There has to be a consistency of approach. Some are even calling for greater sanctions against Russia. So I would disagree with the premise that there will be these decades before us. It's in our hands.
Okay,
Sure.
I saw another hand in the audience. I just want to get the folks to have a chance to ask questions. So I see one hand there and I see one up there. So if you, no, it's in the back actually. It's you see.
You are quite brave to ignore Sandy Fershball in this room. So.
I'm sorry then. Right after. Okay.
With him first?
No, that's okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sarah Amin, Compact Magazine. I just want to add to the question of the former minister from Egypt, the question that isn't it necessary to look for partnership with Mr. or President Putin in the fight against ISIS, ISIL, Islamic State, whatever you call it, all the different branches of the Brotherhood, be it al-Nusra or, Jaish al-Islam. They have many names, many faces,
Sure.
but all of them are violent and very deadly.
Okay.
Not only there, but also in Europe. Thank you.
I think I get your drift. The world's interconnected. All these problems are related. Solutions are not possible unless all players are actively involved. Sounds logical, but that means sitting down and dealing with tough issues. If I can ask you, is that possible? Can you prevail in such a situation? Can you, is it possible to reach this type of an understanding, do you believe?
I believe that all these questions are somehow interrelated. Obviously, I wanted to respond to the former Lithuanian Prime Minister's question, but the question from Egypt was basically from the same, on the same issue. I think my problem with this debate and this discourse is that we are, as you rightly said, too much Russia concentrated. We talk too much about Russia. We talk too much about what is it Mr. Putin wants, what is it planned in Kremlin, and so on and so forth. But we do not talk that much about what is it Europe will look like in 20 years. There is not that much we can influence the processes in Russia. We cannot influence what kind of constitutional amendments they will make, what kind of setup they will propose to the rest of the world. But here, Georgia unfortunately is not part of it yet, but all of you are here in charge of discussing what Europe will look in 20 years. And all those questions about cracks in Europe, about terrorism, or any threat for that matter, being it from south or from the east, should be answered by the European or NATO, Euro-Atlantic in this case, united, strong, adequate, I would say, positive policy. Not looking at what is it that will be designed by the Kremlin, but looking at what is it that Paris or Washington or Brussels will design for safety in Europe and for safer world. Because, whatever it's worth of, European Union or NATO today are not only about Article 5 boundary safety, but it is about the safety in the rest of the world. We are in Afghanistan fighting together. And Afghanistan and safety and security in Afghanistan is beyond the Article 5 boundaries. But we are fighting there together. And we went to Mali and we went to Central Africa together with French and German troops to fight for peace and security in Africa. And it is beyond the Article 5 boundaries. I think this is what we should be talking about more rather than discussing how long it will take for Putin or for Russian society or for the Russian lawmakers to decide what is the best constitutional arrangement for them. My answer to all these questions will be, first of all, not let anybody to have a separate game with any of the European nations. And for that matter, this question with UK out, Russia in should be obviously on top of the agenda. UK out, I completely agree with Damon what he said, so I won't repeat it again, is going to be exactly what fits the best the Moscow plans.
Oh.
And second of all, when we talk about the Cold War, and it was said here, what is it, how do we define Cold War? What are the red lines? What are the boundaries? What is it that we call Cold War? Mr. Medvedev told us very clearly in Munich Security Conference that there is already a Cold War. Depending on how we define it, we have different perspective of that. Moscow looks at it differently. In Tbilisi, we look at it differently. In Washington, you look at it differently. But at the end of the day, if the game is about defining backyards, our backyard, your backyard, Russia's backyard, then that is what is the Cold War in 21st century. I think this is what we should all avoid and we should all fight against.
Well said. Thank you very much. I'm told we have time for one last question, and that's this gentleman right here who's had his hand up the whole time. If somebody could get a microphone to him, please. If you could stand up, sir. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sandy Vershbal, the Deputy Secretary General of NATO. it actually picks up on the last couple of questions, even though I was waiting patiently. The title of the panel was Keeping Europe Safe, and I think the number one requirement for that is keeping NATO unified. And we have to be unified in our Eastern strategy, which means staying firm and consistent with our principles when it comes to Russia, strengthening our deterrence, engaging with Russia from a position of strength, trying to manage what's likely to be a competitive relationship, whether it's for 5, 10, or 15 years. It also means being true to our principles when it comes to Ukraine and Georgia, ultimately delivering on our promises to Georgia regarding its membership over the coming years. But keeping the alliance unified also means addressing the primary security concerns of the southern allies, those who are not as focused on Russia. And I would ask, maybe Linus, since he hasn't addressed this part of the dialogue, what should the NATO summit deliver when it comes to a southern strategy? How can we ensure that NATO is relevant to the security concerns of the Mediterranean allies, of those who are more concerned about failing states, about the Islamic State, about the kind of ring of fire that we face across the entire Middle East, North Africa region? Because without unity on both dimensions, ultimately, we could begin to drift apart again soon after the Warsaw Summit, which of course will be a success. But, and we will succeed on the battalion units, and we may even decide on those by the defense ministers meeting. But we have to fully address the southern challenges as well, and I think that's still the unfinished business from now to Warsaw.
Thank you very much, then. I see that we have to move on to our next panel, so first of all, I'd like to thank our distinguished panel for your time, Mr. Wilson, Ms. Dobianski, Mr. Shesky, Ms. Kitasheli, and Mr. Linus. Thank you. Thank you, Linus. And I'd like to thank you folks. Thank you very much for listening to us. Oh, I'm sorry? I'm sorry, I didn't, what was the...
It was question and you didn't allow to answer, but maybe we time shortage, so we'll talk individually.
Well, if you can, then I give you one minute if you want to take a swing at it.
1 minute, so NATO is very creative for special language, so we have 28 for 28, 360 degrees, all directions, and that should be really inclusive. So I do share what Tina just said. We really have to take it very inclusively, so to say, and not to solve one crisis at the expense of others. So we have to do that, all of us, and that should be also deliverable from Warsaw.
So it sounds like it's possible. So again, thank you very much, and have a great forum. I appreciate it. Thank you.